Today's readings, Exodus 1, Job 18, Luke 4, and 1 Corinthians 5. I want to start in Luke 4 before turning to Exodus 1. Luke 4 begins this way. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. Now, of course, we know the rest of that section, right? Jesus is tempted in the three temptations. But the implication of these first few verses are a couple things to take note of. One, he was full of the Holy Spirit. To go against the enemy, he had to be full of the Holy Spirit. Why would we not think otherwise for our lives? Why would we not realize if Jesus was full of the Holy Spirit in order to hold fast to temptation, how much more would we and do we need to be full of the Holy Spirit? And then, just because you're full of the Holy Spirit doesn't mean there's not going to be difficult things and temptations, right? He's led by the Spirit in the wilderness. And then 40 days being tempted by the devil. It's likely there was more than these three things, but they represent, or it was the season, that time. And yet, because he was led by the Spirit, full of the Spirit, he had the right answers in the Spirit. Right? Jesus told that to the disciples. Don't worry about what you will say when. Why? Because you'll be given the right words. James says, if you lack wisdom, ask. Let's do those things. Well, a couple minutes now in Exodus chapter 1. It's the beginning of a new book, second book of the first 5, the Pentateuch. And it probably doesn't go how you think it's going to go if you're of the household of Israel. And there with all the grandeur and the grace and the glory of Egypt, this family of 70 is now settled in Egypt. Joseph, second in command, and then he dies. And then the brothers in that generation dies. And what happens? Well, verse 7 of chapter 1 of Exodus. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So they're just growing like crazy, right? All kinds of families. And verse 8 happens. There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So time has gone on. A lot of years. And he said to his people, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. They didn't do anything to give this new Pharaoh any indication that they were a threat. They just were too many. And sometimes in our Christian life, you're not doing anything to someone, but by your life, by who you represent, by the things you stand for, people are threatened. So they set taskmasters over them, and they built up some cities, and they oppressed them more, and then they continued to multiply. They made them work as slaves. And then the king goes after the Hebrew midwives that, as their babies are being born, if they're sons, you are supposed to kill them. But verse 17, the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this, and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous, give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born of the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile. You shall let every daughter live. It's a good example of standing up against those who are enforcing an ungodly thing. And their fear of God, their respect and honor and love for God was greater than their respect and obedience to the king. And God saw that and he rewarded that. And so it's a very inauspicious, downward turning chapter in some regards from the end of chapter 50 of Genesis, where there's this excitement and new life happening, and yet it really serves a purpose of God for them to be there in Egypt for a season, to be like an incubator for the people to grow and multiply, and then go through some hardships. Because God often allows us to go through suffering so we can comfort others, so that character can be revealed, so that character can be shaped and strengthened. And that's what's going to happen, and it is happening here in Exodus chapter 1. And so right away we're given a clue that some are going to stand for what's right, and as we go along there'll be others as well. How's it going in your life? Are you standing for what's right? Are you just living your life before the Lord, shining bright? Until next time, keep growing little by little.